Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Difficult Conversations, where we tackle taboo topics in a safe space through empowerment and education. Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Welcome back to another amazing episode. So on this episode, we just, as a disclaimer, we're going to be talking a lot about a really heavy topic of bereavement. And there's just been a lot of stuff going on in our community, a lot of deaths, amongst youth, older people. And we wanted to just take some time to kind of explore this topic. And we've been asking around about with, family and friends. It's just been a really heavy time, and a lot of people are processing it in a lot of different ways. I talked to one of my really close friends, and she had shared with me, what that process of grieving was like for her, because she had lost her parents really young. She lost both her parents in the span of a 6-month period. And, when I read what she had wrote me, and it was really moving. And I think I haven't really saw grief or somebody processing it in this way, and I wanted to share just the last couple of paragraphs that she had shared. So she said, "The flood of people that had taken over our home for the past week, holding back all grief had to offer, had all left us behind. The house was emptied. For everyone else, it was business as usual after the 3-day funeral procession. They came, they paid their respects, and they left. The weeks following my mother's death, we were filled with a lot of firsts. My uncles, who were in their early 20s, were suddenly parents to 2 young girls, and I, at 10 years old, was the woman of the house. For the first time in my life, I was responsible for the groceries list. For the first time in my uncle's life, he was responsible for shopping for groceries and school supplies and school schedules and hiring servants. The servants never lasted longer than a couple weeks. Because they were scared of living in a house with a bunch of boys and 2 young girls. So my uncles cooked and taught me how to cook. We cleaned the house together, and we tried to survive. And we were alone, forgotten, and trying to adapt to our new reality." So one of the things that really stood out to me is how alone she had felt during that whole process of grieving after the funeral. And I think a lot of time we put a lot of emphasis on being there for people in the moment, not necessarily long term. So I wanted to kind of maybe go back a little bit and start off with what is grief in our community and what that looks like.
So for me, grief is some complicated concept for me, because culturally or societal wise that we don't really talk about grief in many aspects of it, even how to and what are the type of grief that we should kind of go through it, and where for me it kind of induces a lot of fear, anxiety, and worry, and that isolation feeling where you are the only one kind of going through that experiences on your own versus kind of like collective experiences that we can go through in this spaces. So I feel like when we know the type of grief in itself, it makes us better understanding of like, how do I ask for those supports if I am able to? And if I'm not asking for support, how do I be there for somebody who's grieving, and what ways that could look like? And so for me, I still struggle with that because of the concept itself is very like ambiguous for me. And I struggle recently when I lost my grandmother. I remember feeling like there is level of access to that person's kind of discontinued, but it seemed like, just like your friend who shared that, I hear that there's not really a go-to formula to kind of grieve it. So you become by yourself and there's not even that type to discuss, right? And I think one of the biggest reason why we're having this conversation, like how can we be there for each other? Part of the discussion of like what is culturally do we do? How do we are what are the things that we do well and what are things that we don't really do well itself too. And so when we discuss what type that looks like, I'm still trying to figure out myself. So
Yeah, and I think also there's two aspects of grief, right? Like the person that is going through it, and then the people that are observing and witness to the grief, right? And for that, for the person that is going through it, the first thing that we have to validate is that there's no like cookie cutter formula of what grief is supposed to look like. And for most people and some people that necessarily maybe like their body doesn't react the way other people's does, right? And that like some people tears are right there. For example, for me, I cry watching movies. Like if it's something sad happening, I cry. If my friends are crying next to me, I'm not the person that comforts them, I'm the person crying next to them. I see a person crossing the street, I'm the person that cried. Like like I see something happening to them on the street, I'm the person that cries right there. But when something like death happens, my body does not like I literally have to figure out, like trying to make, like I could poke my eyes and tears won't come out for the first like significant amount of time. And I used to feel a lot of guilt with that. Like, does that mean that I don't love the person as much as I thought? Does that mean that like my outer expression of grief or my outer expression of sadness is not similar to what I'm seeing around me? People can do, and I used to think like this outer like raging expression of sadness with tears and screaming and all of that meant that you love them more, right? And so like understanding that everyone's body reacts to grief differently, and so like not having shame about how you are reacting to your grief and your loss, but then in addition to the people that are observing and witness to people's grief, that know that so and so lost a person, we also as a community tend to gravitate towards that person that has this like really loud and really prominent expression of grief, and like kind of trying to help them. And then we lose, and we those people that are not really that expressive, and they we think they're okay, which sometimes is actually the opposite, because that person has an outlet Allah has given them. They have the ability to express it out loud, feel it, kind of get it out of their system to a certain degree, while that person that can't find their pain, or that can't find their tears, is struggling, and that struggle comes with shame, that struggle comes with neglect, and feeling like maybe, and also people's judgment, right? So like imagine, like I know a wife that her husband passed away, and she couldn't cry. The people around her were crying, and people around her were, and she was just almost in shock, and she hasn't shaken off the shock yet. So there was a lot of a lot of talk about, why isn't she crying? What is going on? And there's like the swirling of that happens. So I think also as a community, as witnesses, making sure that we're checking up on people that are not really having that outer expression, that that would be.
I think holding space for that person who is grieving, can go a long way. And as a community, I know that, traditionally we have the 3 days of grieving. One of the things I feel like we do well is that we do show up. There are afoshas or women's groups that come around. They'll do all the cooking. They will serve. And I didn't realize, I guess sometimes when you're in the culture, you kind of take a lot of these things for granted. But working in healthcare and seeing people, as a respiratory therapist, a lot of the times we're probably the last person to kind of see that person, because we might take off the breathing tube and stuff like that. So sometimes there's nobody there. A lot of the times there's nobody there, unless this person comes from a community or a background where it's very communal. and then you see the whole room is kind of filled and stuff like that. So alhamdulillah, in that aspect, I feel like as a community, we show up, we provide the cooking, the cleaning, and for those 3 days. And so I think what I'm hearing you guys say is that let's maybe take it beyond that. Check in with this person after the 3 days, because we do it so often, and we have like funerals almost every other weekend. We know if somebody dies back home and stuff like that, it can get into a routine where you go, you pay your respects, and then you leave. And so if everybody's doing that, then the week afterwards, and I know that my friend that had shared the story with me, she was saying how like the first couple of weeks everybody was there, the house was packed, but then afterwards, one of the I vividly remember she was saying how like the first couple of nights she was sleeping in her bed and she just felt utterly alone. Um,
I think I want to explain a little bit about what Bonnie was saying earlier, the emotional impact of individuals and the way that they process at the moment and afterward. I think we forget that grief sometimes is like, not even sometimes, it's like a storm, right? And psychologically, your brain, it doesn't really digest to the shock when it happened. And sometimes you start feeling things after people leave. Sometimes you leave it, you feel it while you're at the moment, because your body's able to recognize that. Sometimes it takes 6 months down the road you to notice that, wait, this person's not here. I can't call them. I can't talk to them. And that access is denied, right? And so what the body does is that the emotions, that is like, usually the part of our brain is like the emotion is back here. And this shuts down from this part of the brain where things are able to fully process and you can connect, you can communicate, right? And so when you are experiencing something as emotionally as shocking as death, your body goes into the shock mode itself. And in our community, we don't understand the psychological and the emotional, that grief looks differently for everybody aspect of it, but we only know one way, which is crying and like expressing in front of everybody for them to know you are actually sad, right? And that sadness has to be very vivid in their face. It shouldn't be looking like invisible. That invisible aspect of it is something that us Oromo people, or in general anybody, any like anyone who loses loved ones, is like, why is this person not crying? Because the tears hasn't connected to the brain yet. The emotion has not happened yet. Even sometime when like you get into car accident, right? It takes you a long time for you to recognize that the shock wore off. Yeah. Exactly. When the shock wears off, then you're like, oh my gosh, that was traumatizing. And so even the death of, especially when we're talking about your friend, the death of her parent, and knowing that itself for 10-year-old, imagine the trauma, physical trauma that child is going through, right? And now from being a little girl, probably a year prior, just enjoying little things and kind of exploring herself, to now being an adult, basically in a span of a year, right? To losing two people that is the most concrete and grounded people in her life, and within those moments. And I think when we talk about that, it's like, how can we understand is beyond what we were told culturally, or beyond what traditionally we've been practicing. And then there's also human in that body, right? There's emotion in that body. And so even the conversation of like, why this person's not crying, the person may feel like they're not presently hearing you, but they hear what you said. But they just don't have the emotional energy or the capacity to talk to you about that and how that affected you. And so that messaging kind of goes in the back of their head. It's like, why would these people even think about that? That's not even the thing that is in my mind. I just lost the two most important people in my life. And my focus is basically what am I going to do? What is my sister going to do? Right? What is my family going to do? Right? Is that disconnection is the thing that we should be talking about today. It's like the emotional concept, the emotional support, the emotional availability that we should be when somebody loses. Because like you said earlier, there's a lot of people die in our community, young people, like very, very young people, whether it is suicide, whether it is accident, whether it is homicide, all of it is happening in our community. And then the parents are like a car accident too. The parents like they don't even know what to do, right? And sometimes there was a conversation I think Bonnie was talking about last week is that the mother has to see somebody that looks similar to her son in order for the shock to alert her, saying, wait, that's my son, but it's not her son, right? So it's like, so basically what I'm trying to say is that it looks different. And how can we be able to be there for each other when we know that everybody's going to experience sleep differently?
Yeah. And to kind of just add a little bit to that, and it's funny because I was kind of smiling when you were talking about the other person hears you when you're saying why aren't they crying? I can talk about a specific incident within my life where I just had, my mom pass away too, and I remember hearing it and going down on the ground, like literally collapsing to the ground, and then I just covered my face and I was on the ground, and I remember this lady literally coming this close to my face and telling and saying out loud, right? It's insane to me. Coming this close to me and saying, let me hear what she's saying. Wallahi wa billahi wa tallahi. Like coming this close. I'm on the ground with my face covered and being like, let me hear what she's saying. So I started performing. And I started saying things like, oh, mom, why did you leave? And all, because I thought that's what's expected of me. My body wasn't reacting. Like I told you guys earlier, I wasn't even having tears. I just was shocked. So I didn't know what to do. So I just dropped. And she was this close and on the ground, on her knees with me. Instead of comforting me, she was trying to like get some sort of like,
information
material to like use for her grief. You know what I mean? And I started saying these things, and I remember like, this is not what I want to say, or I feel like saying. I mean, I'm sure I was, all of those things. So, like the fact that you said they hear you.
So is it like, because I guess at my reference point of like funerals might be a little bit different, because like, were they expecting you to do the whole wailing and stuff like that?
I think so.
Okay.
Not her specifically.
Okay.
Like, and I think also people come to, again, the idea that the inability to understand that maybe this girl is not processing. Maybe this girl is also, or they go to the extreme, right? Where they just think you're over it already.
Yeah.
You're like, you're not, you don't understand. You don't know what is happening.
Yeah.
While again, like the Habi, like you said, how, my brain automatically went to what's next? Who's going to take care of us? What are we going to do? There's nobody here anymore. Where do we live? All of these things.
It went into problem
solving mode. But they think I'm not even there.
Yeah.
Or and again, we can go a little bit deeper into the idea of like what is appropriate to expose kids to, because like I've talked many times, I was exposed to, I still grapple with the idea, like, if it was right or wrong. But I remember at age 9, people dragging me in to say goodbye to my dad's corpse. And they're like, kiss him. Say you forgive him. Kiss him. And me kissing this person that I love so much, being very gray and very cold. And that's literally the last memory I have of this person now. So but then there's a finality to it. Like whenever my brain in my dreams I would go and I used to have dreams about like my parents coming back, and I would always ask them, what happened? Like, I know you died because I kissed your, corpse, and goodbye. So and then they obviously, my brain constructs stories, us, whatever. And so there's a finality that came with that action, but there's a lot of trauma that came with it too, because I still feel their skin on my lips.
Yeah.
I still see the color of their skin, and also, with our community, you get washed and all, and so the cold might not even be their skin. It might be the cold water their body was washed through, so like, but then there's this, and was that appropriate for a 9-year-old and and so on and so forth, to be able to have that experience. So again, like my point is, either we go too extreme this way, where we're literally just expecting them to wail and or we're go extreme this way where we're like, oh, they're not gonna feel it, they're not gonna remember, but they need to do this, and we make them do things that we
I think
I wonder how scary that might be for that little girl, and that people are not comforting her. Instead, they're asking her obligation of the things that she needs to do, right?
Yeah.
And the mindset of like, you are doing the things that they want you to do versus how is she? Like, how are you doing?
Yeah.
And in a sense, like it's like, so there, that's what I'm saying. There's like so much of disconnection in our community when it comes to grieving, to where performing is part of it, right? Not the emotional support of regulation that happens where the person feels seen and heard. And I think I get why anybody who lose loved ones, especially people who are like kids who lose a loved one, they early on experience the loneliness, the depth loneliness that they constantly search for people to see them, understand them. I think it started from that experiences, because when they were trying to understand the world with the most dramatic timing, people are telling them to do, where they are so disconnected from the mindset of saying, let me comfort this person so they don't have to feel anything, and said, let's do the things that were traditionally are taught to us.
Yeah. And I think even like going back to traditions and stuff like that, is that I feel like we're almost stuck between like two extremes, right? Like growing up, I always heard like, oh, don't, like at funerals, don't wail and don't do this because that's such an Amara thing to do.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys, I don't know if you guys heard that sentiment. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because at the other end, you have, you know, the Islamic aspect of it, right? Please, you know, have sabr, have patience, you know, try to go through this, you know, the hardest thing in your life with the thought that, you know, you will see this person again in the akhirah, right? And it's not the fact that they have passed away. This is not a finite thing. You know, it kind of brings that whole thing back together. So I feel like as a community, we're not talking about it, but we're stuck in between these two ideas. And how do we create that balance?
Yeah, no, and also, you know, I want to definitely talk about the Islamic perspective of, you know, people saying like have sabr and have patience, and also taking that too far and having a very unrealistic expectation of those that are grieving, you know. And I talked to you guys about the story of this mom that just lost her kid, and I literally was standing right next to her, and she saw someone that she looked like her child, and then she started breaking down. She wasn't wailing or anything. It was just streams of tears, and she was just saying, oh, my son, that's how he looks like, but it's not him.
They're jumping on her.
Yeah. And then they were like, sabr ko yati, Allah's gonna be mad at you, and Allah's not human.
Yeah.
Allah knows more about what she's going through than you are, or even she does. Yeah. Allah is the most understanding being on the universe. So how can you
put your limitations?
Yeah. And it's so disgusting. And like in the same funeral, there was the daughter, and she wasn't expressing emotions.
Okay.
She wasn't expressing emotions, and basically they were telling her to comfort her mother and tell her to stop crying and tell her to like get in control. And I was like, I literally was confused to what universe I just entered, because they're like, is it now this 17-year-old's responsibility to navigate her mom's emotions of losing a child, like, and get her in control? How does that make sense? And but it was very, very annoying and very disgusting, because I think in our community we do have rahma, we do care about our people, we do want the best for. And the reason those people were saying those things was for her, you know, because they have this real, genuine belief that Allah's gonna like smite her or something, you know. And so I understand it comes from a good place, but sometimes it's not
It's
channeled.
misplaced, yeah.
But I wonder why. Okay, to that, I want to bring something. I was like, why is it so hard for us as a community to sit with discomfort, the
Yeah.
emotional discomfort that we don't know?
Yeah.
Because for me, that jumping
Mhm.
to the mom to telling her is their own discomfort.
Yep.
Right. So
Mhm.
it's like because they feel uncomfortable that she's doing that, so they want to like reduce it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like
Mhm.
okay, you're done,
Yeah.
you're done crying. Like
Yeah.
so, I'm
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
It's more
Yeah.
about like how I'm feeling
Yeah.
than how the person's feeling.
But I don't even think they recognize that. I think
They
they're
don't,
doing
yeah.
it for her.
Yeah.
Or for the
They
person
think they
that's-
are. They think they are. So
Yeah.
part of it, I'm curious for you guys. Like as we were talking about this conversation of like, when it comes to grief is a lot of like emotional relocation, right? You feel sad, you feel angry, you feel accepting, and then all of a sudden you're gonna cry again, and you go through all this emotional elevation in a different flows
Mhm.
that your body's able to understand.
Mhm.
But when a person is grieving, why can we just sit with them in silence? Like they can cry and just say, you're doing great. You're doing great that you're crying.
Yeah.
I don't think we have those tools yet.
Yeah.
I don't think we've developed.
I'm crying because
because like even me, like forget about like grief of a loved one. At my big age, I'm still grappling with emotions that my children show me.
okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's
That's
like
true.
it's like a lot of working through your own issues first
Mhm.
before you can recognize, oh, this person needs me to do this, and just sit there in silence. It's
So,
uncomfortable.
but that's what I'm saying, right? Like when we are jumping on somebody else, for me, when I hear and see that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that tells me it's like, okay, yes, you have your own discomfort around grieving and sadness and emotion in general, but how do we get there?
Mhm.
Because in the funerals are going to keep happening.
Yeah.
And this behavior is going to continue traumatizing individuals who needs to work through this,
Mhm.
right? But what can we do in the meantime, noticing that everybody's grief looks different,
Mhm.
everybody's sadness looks different,
Mhm.
and it's not my job to tell them how to grieve.
Mhm.
It's not my job to tell them like they need to be patient Islamically,
Mhm.
because Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
cried every time when he went to see his mother's grave. He cried.
Yeah.
When he lost Khadija, he cried.
Mhm.
Like he didn't say don't cry.
And he was still sad.
He's still
years
sad.
later.
Exactly. And he like Islamically, we can express emotions, we can talk about emotion, live with emotion. But I feel like we kind of take the Islam aspect and use a little bit of cultural understanding that is misguided from Islam, right? They got it from the misguided understanding of what Islam is.
Mhm.
And then they try to apply that
Yeah.
at funeral.
It's
saying,
one-dimensional.
Yeah.
I think it's taking the humanness out of it, and it's like applying what is comfortable,
yes.
not necessarily the holistic view of grief and dying.
Yes. And so that's why we're here in this conversation by
Yeah.
saying like, okay, how can we have a grief for the individuals who's going through it, and what will be the most appropriate way? Because earlier, I'm sure you mentioned about balance, right?
Mm-hmm.
In Oromo community, what would that balance look like, right? In this moment that we're talking about grief.
Yeah. I think, first of all, being realistic and logical, right? Like it's not always about emotions in the sense that you don't always just have to come to cry. And there's this aspect again of, I always want to go back to this performative piece where they want to go and they want the person that's grieving to see
you.
them, so that, hey, just register that I came to your funeral, and it should come from the space of like, okay, if I'm coming, I should come with the purpose, right? The first 3 days, the first week, alhamdulillah, we're really good about, well, actually, rewind. Some of us are really good about like coming with food and being there to serve and to help instead of to be catered to. Other of us, and I've also been in my very, very young life, I feel like I have a lot of funeral experiences, and I've seen where people that come to comfort the family, and then they end up acting like they're at a 5-star restaurant and ordering things
Yeah.
and ordering the people that just lost somebody to go, oh, can you please get me some? Can you get me that water? That this hulbata doesn't taste very good. Can I get the aruza instead?
So when did we make it into a catering thing? I want to know, because like I have friends that are like not Oromo and, you know, still Muslim, East African and stuff. They don't do the whole like cooking and like, you know, serving and the whole catering thing. When did that happen?
I don't know, but I know that the Ethiopian Habesha community does that too.
Okay.
But the difference is their afosha, their, you know, not even if for, again, I have so much to say about this. Their afosha or their neighbors, their community takes care of the cooking. Literally, one thing, you know, I think that's really,
similar for us too.
Yeah, but one I appreciate about the Habesha community's funeral, and my parents died back home, so it was kind of like that, where the person's grieving, they don't have to get up from that space that they're in. They sit there and everyone else takes care of their guests for them. And everyone else makes sure that they're eating, they're drinking for that 3-4 days time. And while, you know, there's this gray tent that they used to put up, and like until the gray tent is there. By the 4th day, they pack up the gray tent, wash the dishes, clean the house, and leave. That's also a problem, right? But I feel like within our community, there's not a lot of that. There is that aspect of the Hafoshas doing these things for you, but if someone doesn't have an Hafosha, they're screwed.
Yeah.
If someone doesn't have a support system, they're screwed. So you guys saw the video I sent y'all. Like, you know, if someone is an introvert and that doesn't have a big community like me, we're screwed. Like,
I've seen the video. I just saw the video again.
So like,
okay, well, give context then of the video.
So there's this lady on TikTok. She said,
I think it's Instagram.
Is it Instagram?
Yeah.
And she said,
Sent her husband.
If you had 6 people who would be the 6 people that would carry your casket? And I sent the video to my husband because for her, there was this guy, I think it's like in New York, he's like carrying a casket down the street and the casket is doing duck, 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 duck. And I genuinely think, like, not genuinely, but like I make this joke because my circle is very tight. I don't have a lot of like buzz around me. So I tell my husband, like, you better start lifting weights, buddy. Like, that might just be you. So, but all that isn't just, but in reality, it's almost like a popularity contest too, you know, because people only do for those that have done for them to a certain degree.
Yeah.
And instead of that, like, you know, when you show up, come with food, you know, in those times, you know, maybe the week after, you know, go with food to, you know, maybe that person is not emotionally there to be able to cook for her kids or for her you know, his kids, if it's the wife that died or, you know, for the mom or whatever, like, go with food, go and
just sit there with them.
Sit there.
Yeah.
You know, there is this lady, actually, she went with a maid. So she hired a cleaning service lady, but she dressed her like normal, you know, like, and she said, oh, this is my friend. She wanted to come too. And while they were there, they just sussed out the house just to make sure, like, hey, do they need help or not? And then she went and she said, okay, do you mind if we just help clean up a little bit? And these two are close enough for the person grieving to let that happen, right? So, and then she was like, okay, get to it.
Yeah.
And that lady left the house clean, and I'm sure, you know, she didn't feel bad because this lady hired someone else to do this thing for her. She thought it was her friend doing it for her. You know what I mean? So, like, being thoughtful and going a week later, maybe, you know, 2 weeks later with food so that they have food to eat for the next couple of weeks, helping clean, helping do laundry. Like, I love, and then that's also Adi thing that I really, really appreciate. Adis, they come and they're like, oh, you know, casserole or whatever it is, or, you know, and leave it at your door because the idea of, like, maybe this person doesn't want to see me. They don't have the bandwidth to be able to deal with, like, socializing and having, like, putting that social persona up. So let me just leave it at the door. Give them a text, you know, if they want to, so that they can pick it up. And being that, but then to a certain degree, I don't mean to rag on our community, but to a certain degree, some people, they're like, oh, Nyata Fidef, but she didn't even open,
Yeah.
or like, oh, there is rahmat sometimes is also lacking.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing a couple of things. So I wanted to say, you asked a question before I can add on what Bonnie was saying, is that, well, I think for me as someone from Harar, is that Harar gay specifically, we always had food being made, even regardless as a community. I think the biggest thing that I love about our community is that we collectively show up. We show up. That's what we do.
Some balance.
Yes, right?
To the ripping of body.
Show up. No. I'll get to what she said too. Hold on. We show
y'all,
up.
I love y'all.
And
Please
then,
don't kill me.
And we show up, and then we bring food, and we keep company. And I think we do it as formality, right? And I think formality is traditionally kind of keep passing down. And part of us having this conversation is that, yes, what our parents and our generation before that has done is great. We love the collectiveness that we had and how we continue to do that. We're saying right? We're not saying but we're saying and. What else can we do, right? And part of it is like, yes, formally show up.
Yeah.
Right? But we are also saying don't stop only at the 3 days.
Yeah.
Right?
Or the week.
Or the week, or the month, or the year. Just like keep showing up as routinely. Like saying if there are 6 people, saying you one weekend, you the other weekend, you the other weekend, kind of delegate that and diversify the support system. Yeah. And I think that's the new version that we could do, right?
And I think as
part of the balance that we were talking about earlier.
And I think as like people from diaspora, we have that privilege, right? Yeah. To kind of pick and choose and say, this is what they did well. This is what we can improve on. Yeah. And to kind of work in this framework of what is a new way of dealing with funerals. Yeah. Not so much saying all of it is bad or all of it is good.
Yeah. And I think also just to add up to that is that especially if you're friends or like close with this person, that just don't think because all of a sudden they're functioning like a normal person that they're gotten back to their normality, because they will never go back to that normality. And then also understanding that one thing I'll tell you guys, I had this friend that knew about my mom and so on and so forth, and Tiff later on, my best friend, every Mother's Day they would call me and have a conversation with me, and I paid attention later on, and somehow like I always got to get a call. Like, we always talked, but then that day was very consistent. They would miss my birthdays, to be honest, sometimes. But then they never missed Mother's Days. And it's so interesting. And then later on when we got to talking, I was like, did you guys know that, like, you always, and they're like, why do you think we did that? Like, why do you think we had, and being that thoughtful of like, hey, this day might be so painful and hard for that person, or like the birthday of the person that died, or the, even the anniversary of the person that died, having, or like Mother's Days and Father's Days, or like Valentine's Days for those that like lost. I know we don't celebrate that, but like the world does. That's when you see it so much, right? The happiness is out there and gratitude is out there. So even though they don't celebrate it, they see it. That's a trigger. Yeah. So being able to be like, hey, how are you doing? And you don't have to bring up, like I said, I didn't even know. I didn't put 2 and 2 together until like a couple of times later, where you don't have to talk about the person that's gone, but just having that person, someone to talk, just being there, talking to them about anything, just occupying that 1 hour, that 30 minutes, that 45 minutes, that they don't have to think about the person that's gone.
It's like rewiring the brain to understand that the support system is there, because I think the brain can sometimes like tell you how lonely you are by kind of magnifying all the evidence reason why you're lonely. And I think when people are consistently showing up, you can say like, oh, I know Tiff showing up for me. I know this person's showing up for me. I see that person's calling, right? So the brain is going to start lessening as you go through the part of the grief process that I'm not really alone in this part, because yes, I'm still the one that's dealing with this. I still have support system. And I think part of us talking about the discomfort of emotional grief that we deal with in our community, it's kind of like going back to the balance of routine checking,
Yeah.
right? To balance of equality, like how can we be able to be equally support one another,
Yeah.
where the person doesn't feel so much all that is on their shoulder.
Yeah.
And the
And-
other thing is, I think just providing, like, inviting them out,
Yeah,
to-
that's a big one.
it kind of gets them out of their routine too.
Yeah,
And it
include
doesn't-
them in.
Yeah.
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 Yeah,
Because
I
I
like
think
that.
I was reading this book over the weekend, and something about grief. I can't remember the title right now. But it was saying how, like, sometimes there's a whole loop that happens, right?
Yeah.
People don't invite you out, and then it kind of goes back to saying, you kind of reinforce the idea that I'm lonely, and
Yeah.
it just circles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so as a friend or somebody, that is in the circle for this person, is to kind of break that chain
Yeah.
and kind of invite them out. They might say no the first couple of times,
Yeah.
but keep doing it
Yep.
until they,
Yeah.
come out of
Yeah.
their circle.
And just to add to the things both of you guys were saying about the brain and then the personality change, grief changes fundamentally the person's inner working inside their brain, and then also that obviously impacts their personality, right?
Mhm.
So when the way we process emotions, we become almost nerve endings to a certain
Mhm.
degree,
Mhm.
and that causes maybe the person that used to be very zen and calm and like normal, like has a normal temper
Temperament.
might all of a sudden be easily irritable,
Mhm.
or might be someone that has a short fuse,
Mhm.
or whatever,
Secluded.
secluded. Someone that might be a social butterfly
Yeah.
might turn into a recluse. Someone
Mhm.
that was a recluse might turn into a social butterfly. Because what I like to say is that I always have like
All of that is a coping skill.
it's a coping skill,
Yeah.
right? And also for those people, like sometimes there is self-medication that happens with that,
Mhm.
because I used to always say, like, it feels like there's two craters in my body, in my soul, that like I hear the echo of it,
Mm.
right? Like whenever I'm by myself, they used to echo.
Mm.
So I used to try to go places and do things with people to not hear that echo of these big, huge craters that are
Vacuum
in me,
of
right?
void,
That
yeah.
vacuum that's there.
Mhm.
So people would used to be like, oh, how come you're always hanging out with people? Oh my God, you're a social butterfly. Oh my God, you have 10,000 friends. If you ask those 10,000 people if they really knew me at a certain point, they didn't.
Yeah, they
You know
only
what I
know
mean?
the surface.
They only knew the surface. They
Yeah.
only knew the bubbly, like whatever. So being able to like, okay, maybe this is how this person's processing things.
Mhm.
Maybe this is how this person is processing things. The change in personality, being gracious and merciful enough to to understand this person just went through, like you said, Habe, they just lost access to one of the most important people in their life, or
Mhm.
someone that had a very big impact in their life.
Yeah.
Of course, it's going to have a ripple effect in their personality.
Mhm.
Of course, that's going to create a distrust. I was talking to you guys yesterday, actually. I wasn't going to address this, but, the idea, like, my parents died out of, like, literally in a span of, like, this, right?
Mm.
And they weren't sick for a very long time. It wasn't something that's expected. It was quick and fast and came and gone. So that created a very uncertain uncertainty if people are going to stay alive for me.
Mhm.
So while I was, because I knew we were doing this, I had done a lot of talking and processing some, this situation the last couple of weeks, and it triggered within me this fear and anxiety about my children dying, my husband dying. So I was staying up at night to kind of checking my kids' breathing.
Dude, did I just pick up on your anxiety? Because last night and the last 2 nights, I'm not sleeping either.
No, seriously. I literally was just like, and I was like walking around the house, making sure the windows are closed, the door is closed, and making sure like my kids are breathing, making sure that they're like, and just being extremely, and like the way I was driving and just making sure like super, all of that. And I didn't realize why all of the sudden this thing I had put away that I felt like I haven't experienced
Anxiety
in a
of
long
death
time.
is real.
Yes.
It's
So
real.
was coming back, and I realized it started happening after
We're having this conversation.
we were talking about this conversation.
Yeah.
And it happened because, of course, therapy, and that breakthrough.
I love
And
that. Yeah.
so I just, like, there's that fear of, like,
Yeah.
you might not want to start having friendships anymore because you don't know if you create these new connections, and what if they walk out
It's
and they
very
get killed.
debilitating. It's so debilitating that it makes that your whole nerve system to shut down with so much of danger and fear, because your mind understands as like, I don't want to invest any more emotional work with people.
Yeah.
What if I again lose this person? Because I think here's my trauma with death, right? I remember when I think I was probably 17 or 18. This is the reason why I don't like to answer my phone while I'm sleeping. When my great aunt passed away, I picked up the phone and my dad told me while I was sleeping that she passed away.
Oh, wow.
And yeah,
from back home.
From back home.
Okay.
And
wow.
and then I said I was sleeping, and then I gave my phone to my sister, and then I was just kind of like sitting up against the wall processing
What just
happened and what I just heard.
Yeah.
And this is one of my favorite great aunts. And so to this day, I don't like a phone call from back home. I don't have a really comfort with that. The first thing I said is everything okay? Is everything okay? Because my reaction is like, I'm going to hear a bad news. I'm going to hear a bad news. I'm going to hear bad news.
Especially if it's late at night.
Yeah. Even during the day, like when my sister calls me, my sister knows now, she said assalamu alaikum first, and then she calls, right? So I know it's safe to answer the phone physically, because even as I'm talking about these experiences right now, the gut wrenching of what that night felt like for me is still presently there. And I think even the conversation, we might be collectively going through this. The last 2 nights, I'm getting up in the middle of the night having this gut anxiety feeling where I'm like, okay, so there's this thing in an EMDR that you do is kind of like you find a box and you put information there until you're ready to deal with it. So I use that as an EMDR therapist. I use that to kind of go back to sleep because I did my du'as. I talked to Allah, but at the same time, the like tossing and turning with anxiety was so present that I was like, okay, this is the things that I need to put it away, and then I can talk about it in the morning, or I can deal with it later because I need to sleep. So when Bonnie, you were talking about your anxiety around death for your kids, I don't know where maybe it's this conversation itself is so like heavy for all of us because we selectively lost family members in some aspect of it. And it's relatable. And I don't think it's like, this is what we talked about earlier when we say like, it doesn't end just the time, the moment that person passed away. It continues to with you for the rest of your life. It changes you, how you interact with people. It changes you how you make connection. It changes you how you build relationship. It changes you because you're like, what if you leave too? Like the abandonment is so significant that it really like physically debilitates you. So I just want to name that.
Yeah, and I want to just like add to that, like, you know, sometimes it's not even like anything that is related to that, right? Like, and sometimes like I you know, now my husband knows if he's out and he can't answer his phone, he has to text me. I can't answer my phone. Like, I'm okay. I just can't answer my phone. It's okay. Because my brain doesn't go, oh, he's ignoring me and he's It goes, he's dead. And so, like, that's literally where my brain goes.
Of course.
Like if so yeah, like if I don't talk to my sibling and they don't answer, like if I don't get a response, and that used to come off very clingy
and like
to
controlling.
Controlling. Yeah. Because I used to get really upset when someone doesn't respond back and not like answer my, just let me know you're okay. But I never used to have exactly. But I never used to have the language to express why I was feeling the way I was feeling. So people used to think I just like was controlling and like is very clingy.
So what are like some resources then? Because I think we have to wrap up as well. But what are the resources? Because these are like super heavy, you know, labor intensive emotions around grief and abandonment and stuff like that.
I think before we jump into resources, I want her to finish her thought because she was just talking about how that effect is worrying about other people when she's like anxious about their existence.
No, I mean, it's just the fact that like we see, and like, you know, people will label certain things because they don't understand certain things. I know that one, being able to be honest about like why, like you have to ask why,
Mhm.
because almost if you lost someone important in your life, there's a lot of a big chance most of your personality traits
Mhm.
can go back
sure.
to, you know what I mean, can go back, you can trace that, like, oh, why did this shift? I used to be like this and now I'm like this.
Mhm.
And you can trace that to that loss,
Mhm.
because how did you receive it? How was it told to you? Oh, how close was this person?
Mhm.
How did that happen? Was it fast? Was it slow?
Mhm.
Or, you know, was it something that was really disruptive?
Mhm.
All of these things. So it creates a personality, and even like I used to call them defects. I'm
Mhm.
told not to call them that no more. Like these spaces and these vacancies in your personality that kind of other people might be able to label something else. Like I said, my friends used to think that I was clingy, or my, you know, like, and I used, or bossy, because I
Mhm.
did it, and I had to explain. Once I figured it out, I had to explain, hey, I really just want to know you're okay. Can
Yeah.
you just let me know? We don't have to talk. Just say, hey, I can't talk right now, but I'm okay.
Mhm.
And I'm good.
Those are valid requests, though.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I'm good. Or saying like, the idea, the feeling of, sometimes being not enough
Mhm.
also
Yeah.
could go back to that,
Mhm.
because sometimes the people, you feel like, how come all this death is happening around me?
Yeah.
You know, how come everyone that I
The
love seems
guilt,
to
right?
go?
Mhm.
Yeah.
You know, and like, I'm here. Survival's guilt is real.
Mhm.
Like, oh, if this person was here, maybe
Mhm.
they will be able to figure this situation out,
Yeah.
and maybe able to help these people out more than I do.
Right.
And, you know, and like I can, so anyway, long story short, making sure that you understand this grief, and within our community, we understand
Yeah.
that grief doesn't show up one way.
Yep.
The personality and brain chemistry of people that are grieving really gets altered
Mhm.
for a lifetime. Not
Absolutely.
time doesn't heal shit if you don't work on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
so
You know
true.
what I mean? If
That's
you
very
don't go
true.
to therapy, if you don't investigate, if you don't take your medicine, meaning like, you know, like, and it's, time is not going to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's just going to bury it, and it's going to fester, and it's going
Absolutely.
to show up in different ways.
Mhm.
Yep.
And then lastly, I think also making sure that you have a really strong connection with Allah, because Qadar Allah is a real thing.
Mhm.
It helps in so many ways,
Mhm.
but then at the same time, not guilting people because they haven't gotten there yet,
Mhm.
because
Yeah.
that ruins their relationship with Allah.
Mhm.
Because, and you don't want to be responsible for that.
Yeah.
You don't want to be responsible why someone turned away from Allah because you talked your nonsense
Mhm.
and got in between that relationship.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So I that's all I think I would like to say, is that there's so many different aspects of life grief
Right.
hits.
Mhm.
But
All of it. I would
yeah.
say.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that's important. I think some of the, let's talk about the do's and don'ts
Mhm.
that we should be doing on funerals,
Mhm.
right? And
Yeah.
before and after,
Mhm.
including what Bonnie was saying, is that during the funeral,
Mhm.
one of the things that is due is like offer the du'as and support the people and be presently there, however you're going to be showing up. And
Don't mind for
don't.
information. Don't go down memory lane. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
I just
keep going.
No,
And
yeah.
then we're talking about like etiquette of how we can show up at funerals, like
Mhm.
gossiping,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
Judging
Yes.
the way that a person is grieving, and then being able to kind of like putting the pressure on the griever, the person who's
to
grieving.
explain what happened.
Yes.
Mhm.
And also it's like, and then putting responsibility to serve you.
Yeah.
And that's a don't, like a big
Mhm.
don't. And also do is continue to support afterward.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
that's some of the things that we kind of need to balance and do in order for us to kind of manage those expectations
Mhm.
as a community moving forward.
Mhm.
And I think part of it is like also some of the things that we said earlier is like, as the diasporas Oromos or people who live in the West,
Mhm.
we can take our tradition
Mhm.
and add the new way to it.
Mhm.
So that way that like we can kind of get rid of certain things.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that balance
Yeah.
itself is.
Yeah. And it just came to me right now. Funerals, yes, you can be introspective and grateful that this thing is not happening to you, but the
Mhm.
funeral and the tazia space is not the place to reflect that or to speak
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Oh, I can never imagine if this happened to me.
Yeah. Yeah.
I can't, or like, I literally, wallahi wa billah, I remember a mom hugging her daughter and saying, I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I would do
no,
if
that's
this
being
happened
insensitive.
to me.
That's being really
I'm like,
insensitive.
are you kidding?
Yeah.
But they don't realize people hear.
Yeah.
They think they're so quiet, even though they're speaking in octaves that the universe could hear.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I think it's
we
also
just reflect what they haven't processed either.
I think hopefully, right, this conversation could be a highlight to people, right? Like our stories and Bonnie's stories and the story that you shared is something that would resonate to people saying, you know what? I know there are certain things that I don't like about the way we do it, but we can improve it, right? I think this is why we're having this conversation, is to highlight saying, hey, we need to do better. And we do something really good, but we also need to do better. And so to kind of going back to what you were saying earlier, is that resource-wise, that part of it, I think we already mentioned a lot of the resources, is how can we show up for one another? And what do you think, based on our community, the best resources or even the nuanced resources that we should be having in our community?
I think the masjids, honestly. I think that they can play a bigger role in helping people process grief and stuff like that, rather than just being a place where the funeral is held. Or being a place where, the family of the grieved or whatever pays the masjids and, they stay the 3 days there. Right. Because a lot of times it even puts a bad taste in the people who are masjid goers for the people having the funeral there. Because they leave, food everywhere and it's like, it's unclean and all that stuff. But I think the masjids need to do a better job and step up and provide counseling, grief counseling, provide, so many resources that our community lacks, because fundamentally the masjid has to be that focal point of the community and do more.
Right.
Yeah.
And the other resources that I would add is that, like always, I would say, if you're able to, if you can, I think grief counseling is always the right thing to go about when you're experiencing it. And saying like, I don't have a space in my community or in my social environment that I can grieve this, but I don't understand what's happening to me because I'm not grieving the ways I'm expected to grieve.
But I think if we're trying to target, our community specifically, I think that the masjid is probably the best place to do grief counseling.
It is.
And target those people.
It is, but a lot of people are not at the masjid.
But they will never go to like seek these things out on their own.
But the youth are not at the masjid.
Can I also just add?
But our funerals are not really run by the youth, though. That's the thing.
It is. That's true. But who are we trying to like engage in?
No, I understand that, but I'm saying if we're trying to change how we do things as a community, I think that's one place that is kind of a springboard. It doesn't have to be the only place.
And Abshiro, I think we also have to understand that Oromo people, there's like having an Oromo community center and having a grief counselor there, or like someone that is, centered there, that would be able to help the Oromo community, either Muslim, Christian,
in their language.
And then also having so I guess what I'm trying to say is that you both are right. Being able to have someone that is in the masjid and that is also having, to be honest, having our sheikhs go through grief counseling, like certifications or something, so that they're able to have the secular understanding and secular ways of like, giving therapy, like not therapy, but like advice and the Islamic advice.
Because the reason why I say that is because like on Friday I went to Jummah at one of our masjids. And the topic that was talked about, like, it had no, like, I was like, how does this relate to me? You know what I mean? As somebody going to the masjid, having my own issues and blah, 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 it's completely, like, disconnected. You know what I mean? And so I think
Wait, what was was there a funeral happening there? Is that what they were talking about?
It was, but it's not, like... I can't even remember the topic of what it was because I just completely checked out. You know what I mean? Because we have so many, like, we have grief going on. We have deaths in our community. We have drug use. We have suicide and all this stuff. But it's not being talked about on the minbar.
And you know what it is? Actually, when I went to the masjid, I I think it was on Friday, not this Friday, but not probably the month. But
Yeah.
they were talking about how the sheikh was talking about how he feels like it's whack-a-mole time. So like they only get members at that space and at that time. So they want to be able to address like and like
Yeah.
so many things that sometimes maybe they're addressing that thing that's in the forefront of their mind, and then that thing might not be something that relates to you specifically. Does
Or
that make
anybody.
sense? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
So, I
So,
mean,
I
I do
don't
want to kind of, yes, you're right.
Yeah.
We need it all.
Yeah.
We need more. And
Yeah.
I think we continue to will have this conversation where we can kind of provide more resources and support system.
Yeah.
But I do want to just kind of do a recap of today's show, and that grief, again, it takes a lot of emphasis and empathy and patience and balance, and kind of providing that and being able to understand that every single grief is personal. Respecting the Islamic principle is also another aspect of to going through that, and understanding that there is nuance to ways that other people may grieve. And so part of it that we would just want to encourage our audience to, hopefully this is a conversation that needs to continue having, but for them to just kind of have a place to be seen and heard and understood a little bit. And so we just want to invite our listeners to think about the different ways that they also approach grief and how they grieve themselves, and ways that it worked for them in the past. And that is something that we can continue to share.
And how to change, what are ways that our community can improve? Because there are so many things that we probably haven't thought about,
Yep.
Creative ways
Yep.
that we can implement.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So
Thank you so much, everyone. This has been
difficult conversation. Assalamu alaikum.
Join the conversation in the comments section or on our Instagram page to share with us what you think. We do not have all the answers, and our biggest goal is to kick off and get the conversation going. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept our efforts and use us as catalysts for change.
BC. No relation to NBC.